Sam Guthrie, aka Cannonball, has been both an X-Man and an Avenger, and due to his apparent status as an external, is believed to be immortal. His powers are based around the ability to generate thermochemical energy and release it from his skin, then using that energy to propel his body through the air at fantastic speeds, effectively making him, as his name states, a human cannonball. Compared to the rest of this list, he is definitely lacking in the variety of powers department, but really, any superhero with immortality is going to be an asset, and I'd be happy to have him in my corner. Number 9. Thor is only borderline immortal, since he can be killed by Ragnarok. That said, it's not permanent because of the cycle of rebirth, and it's also a comic and he's not Ben Parker, so Thor will always be back. At least, that's what it appears to be anyway. Regardless, Thor's powers are well known, especially given his prolific role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But let's take a quick look at those. Obviously, we have superhuman strength, speed, durability, and, as long as he's eating the golden apples, stay in his physical prime. And with Mjolnir, he possesses dimensional transportation, a form of flight, and weather manipulation, and that's more than enough for me to say he's worthy of being on this list. Number 8. I am going to call this one potentially immortal, simply because while he can die, he's also been seen living 800 years in the future in the X-Force/Cable one-shot Messiah War, so seemingly, as long as no one kills Deadpool, he'll keep living. And given this character has, or should have been killed more times than I can count, killing him doesn't seem to be enough to stop him from coming back. So, I'm gonna go ahead and add him to this list. Number 7. Yep, Superman's immortal. At least, as long as he isn't killed. Although, let's be real, that hasn't stopped him yet either. Action Comics 1000 depicted a story of Superman bidding farewell to the Earth, and more specifically, his parents, shortly before it would be consumed by the sun, confirming that Superman could not die of natural causes. But also, in a sweet moment, we witness Clark question life, even now that he's billions of years old. We see him question what it was all for and why he keeps coming back. We already know Superman is strong, but that goes without saying. But even with everything he's experienced over the length of his incredibly long life, we see that the true strength of Superman is in his considerate nature and the strength of his heart, even in the last moments of the Earth. Number 6. Artemis is actually a fairly new character, not to be confused with Artemis Croc. This, fully known as Artemis of Bana Migdal, is an Amazon who left to recover the Bow of Ra, and became an ally of Red Hood and Bizarro in the process. Much like Wonder Woman, Artemis is immortal thanks to being a child of Hera, although she can be killed in battle. She basically has the same base set of powers that Wonder Woman possesses: superhuman strength, agility, stamina, durability. So, if Wonder Woman can make the cut on this list, I'd say Artemis is definitely worthy. Speaking of which, number 5. While Wonder Woman has always been semi-immortal, as of her New 52 relaunch, she's actually been fully immortal. And considering she was impressively strong before that, adding the powers of superhuman speed, accelerated healing, and flight pretty much clinched her being on this list. Heck, she's even gained the powers of Ares, the god of war, so add that to her ever-growing list. And let's face it, with Gal Gadot being her new face, how can you not love her? Number 4. The Phantom Stranger is an interesting immortal, specifically in that he doesn't even seem to be killable. The guy has had his heart removed and still didn't die. His origins are as of yet unknown, but several stories have circulated, including that he's a fallen angel who chose no side between heaven and hell, and thus must walk the earth for all eternity. Another states that he is a citizen of another universe, who at the end of the previous universe passed over to the new universe. That's actually really interesting. This might be just me, but I've always loved fictionized biblical characters. Anyway, Phantom Stranger's powers include dimensional travel, Eldritch Blast, spectral sight, illusion casting, oneromancy, and reality manipulation, just to name a few. So, this guy's kind of amazing, and his only real limitation is his inability to directly intervene with, well, anything. Which kind of makes him sound like, well, some might say, God. Number 3. Yep, Dr. Manhattan couldn't be missed on this list. He's insanely powerful, seemingly impossible to harm, and can restore his body when disintegrated and be just fine. He doesn't breathe, he doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, and just to top it all off, he's immortal. He's basically one of the most powerful beings in the DC universe. As far as being a hero goes, however, he's always kind of towed the line. As far as immortals go, he's similar to Phantom Stranger in that he seems to be disconnected from humanity and only intervenes when he feels it's necessary. So given his power levels and immortal status, and that god attitude, he's on the list. Number 2. Yeah, the fact that the Phoenix Force has ever been stopped is amazing to me. I mean, the Phoenix Force is an ancient cosmic entity that represents life that has not yet been born. and the forces of creation and destruction. It's immortal, and was born of the void between states of being. Its very birth just sounds like a god. In addition, it is the nexus of all psionic energy in all realities of the Omniverse, and is among the most feared beings in the entire universe, and is able to cut and regrow any part of the universe as well as destroy it entirely. And given the aliases it's had over the years, the World Destroyer, the end of all that is, the Big Bang, Chaos Bringer, and Ravager of Worlds, I think it's safe to say that this immortal cosmic entity's strength is pretty boundless. Now if they could just make a good movie about it. Number 1. I'm surprised I don't hear more about the Sentry. So, the Sentry was originally named Robert Reynolds, a middle-aged man who obtained his power from a special serum he took as a boy. The result was he obtained immeasurable power, but another being came to be, known as the Void. The Void turned out to be Robert's other half, and as long as the other exists, the other can never die. They will always come back. And in the most recent volume of Sentry from 2018, the Void and Robert have finally merged together, becoming whole once again and possessing power greater than they ever had while separate, which was already pretty much off the charts. So who knows how powerful this guy is now. That said, an immortal being who can't be stopped by a team of Avengers? Gotta give it to them. That is power.
And at number 10, Captain Universe. Captain Universe was first introduced in Micronauts issue 8. He's a character who possesses something called the Unipower, an extra-dimensional force that transforms you into Captain Universe and gives you superhuman strength, speed, stamina, agility, durability, power enhancement, and enhanced senses. Yeah, it's a lot. He can also use energy blasts, fly, is telekinetic, and perhaps one of his most deadly abilities, he can time travel. There have been many individuals who have hosted the Unipower, with 32 characters on Earth 616 having hosted it at some point over the years, from 1979 onwards. It's also changed its name to the Enigma Force these days too. All in all, seems like kind of a complicated character to introduce to the MCU. And at number 9, the Sentry. The Sentry is a character that many believe will never see the light of day in an MCU film. First and foremost, the character's abilities are quite similar to those of DC's Superman, so that might bring about a few legal troubles for Marvel Studios. Second, let's just, count out what he's capable of. Superhuman strength, stamina and speed, regenerative healing factor, light manipulation, psionic powers, flight, molecular manipulation, which is a bit of a theme on this list with that power to be honest, energy absorption, gravity manipulation, teleportation. Oh, and he's also immortal. No big deal. So imagine what he could do with all of those powers. It's a bit much. On top of that, his other half is the Void, a villainous identity that resulted in the Sentry having to put himself into a self-induced state of amnesia in order to protect the Marvel Universe from himself turning into it. And at number 8, Mangog. Mangog is traditionally a Thor villain, first having appeared in Thor issue 154 back in 1968. He's described as a being the sum total of the hatred of a billion beings, who has superhuman strength, stamina, durability, endurance, can shapeshift, is capable of energy protection via magic manipulation, can feed off the hatred of sentient beings, and of course, is immortal. Now the saving grace for our pal Mangog here is that he's a being who could potentially be adapted in a similar fashion as Surtur was in Thor Ragnarok, but likely won't be a main villain of Thor's. Hey, who knows? That MCU, they always pulling surprises on us. And at number 7, Onslaught. Onslaught first appeared on the panels of Marvel Comics in 1996, in X-Men Volume 2, issue 53, after Charles Xavier accidentally created him when psionically attacking Magneto. Xavier, who attacked Magneto after he ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, caused Magneto to go catatonic. But in the process, the metal manipulator's anger, grief, and desire for vengeance entered Xavier's consciousness, growing into a separate persona known as Onslaught, a character who has psychic omnipotence. The Avengers and Fantastic Four, upon learning of a way to finally defeat Onslaught, actually sacrificed themselves in order to bring an end to the abomination. Luckily, it was revealed that they were all reborn in a pocket universe, and all was well. Yay, comics! The character would later return in a second form with the powers of Franklin Richards, Nate Gray, Professor X, and Magneto combined. All in all, that's kind of a lot. Maybe, in like 10 years from now, and when the X-Men are actually introduced. And at 6, Scar. If you thought the Hulk in the comics was way too OP, well, here's his son. Scar first appeared in What If Planet Hulk issue 1 back in 2007. He's the product of Bruce Banner's Hulk and extraterrestrial Sierra, from whom the character would inherit old power from. Now, old power allows him to draw energy from the planet itself, which in this case is Sakaar. So imagine a character with the powers of the Hulk, strength, endurance, stamina, all of the regenerative abilities that increase the anger that he gets, and an extra bit of power that is essentially a synthesized form of the power cosmic. Yeah, deadly. Granted, the way the Hulk has been depicted in the MCU has really diffused that issue. So it could be possible that Scar might still see the light of day on the big screen, but adapted in a way that doesn't make him the most OP superhero ever. That being said, the chances of us getting a World War Hulk film seem quite unlikely, and bringing Scar into the fray otherwise might be a little left field. And like mildly confusing a little bit. Bruce Banner's still working through some stuff, guys. I don't think he has time for a kid yet. And at number 5, Korvac. Michael Korvac, commonly known by just his last name, first appeared in Giant-Sized Defenders issue 3 back in 1975. Who is he? Well, he's a fellow with the ability to manipulate energy via a specialized computer module, and can wield the power cosmic. He's also a master strategist and brilliant computer scientist to boot. Initially, he was created as a throwaway character, with his creator Steve Gerber calling him more, I quote, of a vacuum cleaner than a villain. He would eventually go on to be an antagonist of the Avengers in what is called the Korvac Saga in Avengers issue 167 to 177 back in 1978. He killed the Avengers, then resurrected them and took his own life, feeling upset that no one else could possibly defeat him. And at number 4, the Goblin Entity. The Goblin Entity, otherwise known as the Goblin Force, is kind of similar to the Phoenix Force, but significantly worse. It has limitless power, which derives from a ravenous hunger that cannot be fulfilled. It has consumed whole galaxies, and even consumed the Phoenix Force when it came across it. Even Celestials couldn't fully bring about its demise. When consuming others, it gains their powers, so the full extent of its capabilities is actually unknown. It can consume and remove a near infinite amount of molecules per second. It's the nexus of all psionic energy. It's capable of sorcery and shadow morphing, of cosmic manipulation, and it can alter time and space itself. It can also transmigrate through time and space by folding its energy back into itself, causing it to collapse like a black hole. Then it reforms itself upon reaching its destination. It exists on Earth 1298, luckily, also known as the Mutant X-Verse, and manages to possess the life force of Marvel Girl, who is Madeline Pryor in that universe, but later jumped ship to the comatose body of the Beyonder. It would go on to kill most of Earth's heroes, including the X-Men, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom, and Namor, and was only stopped by Havoc, who had the nexus of all realities within him, using it to separate the Force from Madeline and defeat it. Moving on to number 3, Molecule Man. After being bombarded by an unknown form of radiation from an experimental particle generator that he accidentally activated, Molecule Man, aka Owen Reese, became one of the most powerful individuals in the Marvel Universe. His powers consist of the ability to warp reality and molecular manipulation. He can control all matter and all energy. When the Watcher alerted the Fantastic Four that he may be a threat, the group took him on, eventually tricking him to win, with the Watcher placing him in confinement in another dimensional world. Initially, Molecule Man was hindered by self-deadened insecurities, subduing his power and restricting him to only being able to manipulate inorganic matter. But over time that changed, and he's been able to manipulate the likes of Mjolnir and the Silver Surfer's surfboard. These days, he's more of a good guy, thankfully, but that doesn't mean that some of the universe's most powerful entities aren't still a little scared by him. Both Galactus and the Beyonder have made it clear that they could be threatened by Reese, with Galactus even saying that the character could destroy him with merely a thought. Yikes. And at number 2, Oblivion. It's often debated whether or not Oblivion is the strongest character to ever exist in the entire Marvel Universe. It is an abstract cosmic entity who represents non-existence, and is a counterforce to the universe expanding. It's another aspect of the entity Death, but do not get them confused. Death is like a sibling to Oblivion, along with Infinity and Eternity. It's omnipotent and represents the inevitable ending of all things. It can manifest wherever, whenever, and can empower others with however much power he desires in order to act in his name. His strength level is near infinite, and he has infinite cosmic powers. He hasn't really messed around with Earth's heroes all that much, minus a few instances like when he sought out his daughter Mirage, or when his agents fought against the Great Lake Avengers. So it doesn't seem like Oblivion really has a reason to be adapted into the MCU anytime soon. Perhaps Marvel Studios feels that it may even be best that if abstract entities like himself and Infinity and Eternity are left on the panels. Death wasn't even adapted in Avengers Infinity War, despite playing a crucial role in Thanos' storyline in the Infinity Gauntlet comic, much of which it is based off of. And finally, in at number 1, The One Above All. The One Above All has a very self-explanatory name. Literally, they are the one who is the most powerful of the multiverse, above all other entities. The Living Tribunal is under them, although the two are said to be in perfect alignment with one another. First appearing in Fantastic Four issue 511 back in 2004, it is stated to be the supreme being within the multiverse. It is omnipotent and above all other cosmic powers and abstract entities. The One Above All is an entity that has rarely been seen in the comics, or explored as much as entities like the Living Tribunal have, but it still has a significant presence. And while the Living Tribunal may be getting an MCU adaptation if fan theories are correct, it's hard to imagine why the One Above All would be necessary in that cinematic universe, considering they're at the very top of the food chain in terms of power and ability. Kinda makes sense why the One Above All hasn't had a whole lot of comic appearances now, doesn't it?
Number 10, the Spectre. Let's start off with a different type of immortality, one coming from a character who was never mortal to begin with. Kinda. The Spectre first appeared in More Fun Comics number 52 back in 1940. Now the Spectre, because of this, dates all the way back to the Golden Age. At first the Spectre was Jim Corrigan, a man whose soul was denied entry into the afterlife by a being known as the Voice, and is instead sent back to fight evil. This, however, was after he was murdered. He would create a costume and call himself the Spectre. However, the version fans would become more familiar with, and who would become the more iconic, was the Silver Age version, which would tweak the Spectre to a spirit of vengeance, who would possess hosts and have them act as a vessel for delivering his brutal brand of justice. This way, you could still also have the Jim Corrigan backstory, but the Spectre could also possess other characters, like for example, Hal Jordan. He was the Spectre after he snapped and killed the entire Green Lantern Corps and Sinestro. But it's fine, it was parallax. I mean, you'd think a cosmic being would know that, but it doesn't matter, except the retcon, so no one has to feel bad. The Spectre has waned in popularity in the modern era and isn't seen anywhere near as much as he used to be. Number 9, Franklin Richards. The son of Reed Richards and Sue Storm Richards of the Fantastic Four. Franklin possesses a terrifying Omega-level power set that has only grown over the years. Franklin first appeared in Fantastic Four Annual number 6 back in 1968 and only just became a teenager. Happy birthday. Now, Franklin's immortality is implied because, well, you'd have to jump through some hoops to explain it via his power set. But he has been placed on the same level as the Celestials and depicted as one of the last beings alive at the end of the universe, just chilling with Galactus. The Cosmic Set have already taken notice of Franklin because he can essentially do anything. Because of this, he is a very desired player on all sides because he's also so dangerous. Hence why in canon at the time of this recording, the Mutant Separatist movement wants him on their side and not allied with his human meta-powered parents, or mutate-powered. He has been shown in certain future timelines to be able to kill Celestials. So in short, Franklin Richards is one to sit up and take notice of. It almost makes his superhero name Powerhouse sound cool. Almost. Number 8, the Hulk. The Hulk is currently, at the time of this recording, in a comic called the Immortal Hulk. And it means what it says. The Hulk is immortal. And this isn't the only time he has been depicted as such. In the very depressing storyline The End, he was shown to be the last person on Earth, utterly alone after his counterpart Bruce Banner died. Hulk is loneliness there is. In the Immortal Hulk, Banner cannot die properly and instead is dragged back to life by the Hulk if his form is killed. The transformations in this comic are depicted as monstrous and Cronenberg-esque, and the punishment the Hulk can take is immense, such as having his whole body cut up and separated into jars. This is while his mind stays intact and he can just watch what's happening to him. There are some truly horrifying prospects attached to proper immortality. The run started off as a really solid horror and then kind of started diving into multiple personalities and a companion who wanted to be the Hulk because he was allowed to be angry. Remember when the Hulk was sent into space? How about his friends and allies and how they fear him and never really trust him? How about how he lives life, drifting from place to place? How he's a danger to people that love him? The right to be angry. Okay. In at number 7, the Phantom Stranger. This is another cosmic entity, and this one with no origin by design. Who is the Phantom Stranger? No one knows. The Phantom Stranger first debuted in Phantom Stranger number 1, all the way back in 1952. Who is he? Well, he is a mysterious figure who just kinda shows up when he is needed. Sometimes, not all the time. He also has abilities that can do what is needed, most of the time. And of course, he is vague and cryptic, for sometimes not even he knows why he was drawn to an event. Because of how vague all of this was, not only has the Phantom Stranger been depicted very differently depending upon the writer, but he never really caught on too well. It's hard to get attached to a mystery person who shows up sometimes cuz. He did show up that one memorable issue though where Superman became a marine vampire. Never forget. Phantom Stranger, just cuz. Number 6, Hercules. Hercules plays a decently large role in the Marvel Universe. He debuted in Journey into Mystery Annual number 1 back in 1965, but that's cuz his first appearance in Avengers Forever was later said to be that of an imposter. Hercules here is immortal because he is an Olympian god in this continuity, and thus gets all the perks. No being a doorman for him. Now, Hercules had a fake-out death fairly recently at the time of this recording, where it looked as though the universe he was fighting in had ceased to exist, been destroyed. However, Amadeus Cho was able to discover that he was in fact still alive. Hercules is a good friend and rival to Thor, you know, like an anime. Hercules has also sacrificed his powers only to have them mysteriously return. Why? Who knows? Phantom Stranger. I know, different companies. Although now there may be a reason. That's what retcons are for. Number 5, Iron Man. Going for a more unconventional form of immortality with Tony Stark. Now Tony is very frail, even by human standards. For a time he needed to be in his Iron Man suit just to survive. And despite all the enhancements he built into his suits, at one point fusing them to him permanently with nanites, he was still brutally killed by his friend Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. This was during Civil War II, and it was because he didn't want to arrest people before they did crimes. However, Tony did not die. No, he managed to AI himself, and then build a new body, which has led to an interesting arc in his 2018 run about AI rights. You know, like those Voyager episodes. So Tony can be immortal, since he has found a way to transfer his consciousness into a digitized format, and hence make himself downloadable into robot bodies. However, every now and again, he must contend with the idea of, is he real? Does he have a soul? Are we just supposed to pretend he's real, Tony, and forget Civil War II happened? Probably. Number 4. Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is an interesting case because no matter the origin, there is always at least implications, if not the downright statement, that she is immortal. Be she made of clay or the daughter of Zeus. Indeed, for a time, all Amazons on Paradise Island, later renamed Themyscira, were said to be immortal. Diana is a goddess and a warrior, and a compassionate leader, walking an intriguing balance of kindness and pragmatism. That is hard for all writers to capture. And of course, she is a staple in some of those "it's a dystopian future but Wonder Woman is still here" stories. This is part of why some fans love pairing her with Superman. As while it varies, he is definitely more long-lived than most mortals. Number 3. Thor. Thor is meant to be immortal as he is a god from Asgard, but Thor keeps dying. Now, he is meant to be extremely long-lived, but for all intents and purposes immortal. However, Thor has been killed on more than one occasion, most recently by Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. Thor's deaths are unique as well, for they play on his mythological origins. So instead of just vanishing, he goes to Valhalla or other realms and can continue to have adventures there. So there is the idea that even if he's gone, he's not fully gone, and people know where to go get him. Number 2. The Sentry. The Sentry is immortal. Don't ask how, they explain it, but just let it be. He took a serum that places molecules a second or two ahead in time. This activated a photosynthetic Superman-style response, which allowed him to store energy and power himself. Immortal. No matter how it came about, the Sentry is immortal, and that is part of what makes him, or made him, so dangerous for a long time. At least in terms of the Sentry's existence, which only dates back to 2000. He was two entities, both the Sentry and the Void, who was a dark mirror to the Sentry. So if he existed forever, so too did the Void. It was part of why the Marvel Universe was made to forget about him, which was the crux of his retconned in origin story. At the time of this recording, his two halves have fused, reconciled. Where does it have to go from there? We shall see. And in at number 1, Dr. Manhattan. John Osterman's whole life changed after the accident that transformed him into Dr. Manhattan. He was the Watchmen universe's only superpowered man, a being of pure energy who recreated himself outside of time and space, and changed everything. Dr. Manhattan has only grown more and more distant from people and the world, largely because he can exist outside of time, seeing all of it simultaneously. He is completely immortal and omnipotent. And of course, there was Doomsday Clock, which brought the Watchmen and DC universes into proper contact with each other, and which essentially concluded with there's gonna be more timelines and crises and a crossover. 100% worth a wait of 2 years.
And at number 10, Juggernaut. While Juggernaut may come to mind initially as an X-Men villain, he's actually got a long history with Spider-Man, having played a significant role in many of the Web-Slinger's stories over the years as an antagonist. Spider-Man is actually one of Juggernaut's most common foes, especially when working with his ally Black Tom Cassidy, who orders Juggernaut to kidnap a potentially useful psychic character named Madame Web. Juggernaut ends up tearing up parts of New York City in the process, and manages to evade Spider-Man, but does not succeed in getting Madame Web. He accidentally removes her from her life support device and abandons her, leaving her for dead. Spider-Man then comes up with a way to defeat him by luring him into some setting concrete, with Juggernaut sinking into it. He eventually digs himself out a month later. So why is he too strong for the MCU currently? Well, technically speaking, he could find his way into the cinematic universe and be a fitting foe for the Web-Slinger. It's just the grander implications that Juggernaut's appearance would have. We're not going to see the likes of Juggernaut until mutants are gradually brought into the MCU now that Disney has the rights to use them. And surely when the mutants arrive in the MCU, our heroes are going to have bigger questions, even bigger than Juggernaut, that will need addressing. So regardless, there's going to be some solid wait time before we see this hulking baddie up on the big screen. And at number 9, Big Wheel. Big Wheel is an absolutely ridiculous villain who first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 182 back in 1978. But if you think about how Big Wheel, aka Jackson Wheel, would appear in a live-action adaptation, Well, he could potentially be rather deadly. In the comics, Jackson drives a large metal wheel that's equipped with guns, Waldo arms, and the ability to climb buildings, all thanks to the Tinkerer. Essentially, if this thing took to rolling around the streets of New York City in an act of domestic terrorism, Jackson could easily have a whole lot of casualties on his hands before Spider-Man even got to the scene of his crimes. He's kind of a go big or go home sort of villain, if you didn't already get that from his supervillain shtick. In reality though, or rather in the comics, Big Wheel is a bit of a joke. Jackson was a businessman who embezzled money from his company, and hired another villain named Rocket Racer to steal the incriminating evidence against him, who then tried to blackmail Big Wheel with it. Big Wheel almost commits suicide because of it, and then chases Rocket Racer around the city until Spider-Man ends up intervening. 20 years later, Big Wheel would reappear, desperate to help Spider-Man in some sort of attempt for redemption, which just led to Spidey taking pity on him and letting him follow him around for the day. So in other words, if Big Wheel were to enter the MCU, he would definitely need some more threatening character traits in order to make him, well, you know, threatening. But he's got a foundation, that's something, right? In at number 8, Morlun. Moving into more serious territory with this one, in our next number we have Morlun. Morlun is a character from Loom World, also known as Earth 001. He goes around the multiverse hunting spider totems, and is the main villain in the Spider-Verse story event. In other words, he has taken on many different iterations of Spider-Man across the multiverse, meaning he's a bit of an expert when it comes to knowing his foes. Aside from that experience, he's got superhuman strength and durability, enhanced speed, agility, stamina, reflexes, has an extended longevity, and perhaps the most dangerous of his abilities, he can absorb life force via physical contact. He's also killed the 616 Spider-Man before in Spider-Man the Other story arc, although that was only temporary, like most deaths in comics. But he did manage to rip out one of Spider-Man's eyeballs, so, you know. Spider-Man, after his near-death experience, would end up in the hospital where Morlun would visit him and then break Mary Jane's arm, which somehow triggered Peter to jump into action with newfound powers, ripping out the villain's throat. Yeah, that's gruesome. Can't quite see sweet little Tom Holland pulling off that stunt just yet as Peter Parker, can you? I mean, maybe give him a few years of dealing with the multiverse drama and we'll see. And at number 7, Kane. On our previous part 1 of this list, we mentioned Jackal, the Spidey villain who cloned the web slinger and brought about a whole lot of trouble and chaos. This time around, let's take a look at some of the clones he produced. Enter Kane Parker, who would later take on the persona of the Scarlet Spider in 2011. Before his turn as a hero though, Kane was previously a baddie, first appearing in Web of Spider-Man issue 119 back in 1994. He would play a huge role in the Clone Saga. A storyline, as previously noted, is not something that Peter Parker of the MCU would be able to handle right now. So what is he capable of? He shares a lot of the traits that Peter has. Superhuman strength, speed, stamina, agility, durability, reflexes, and equilibrium. He has a precognitive spider sense. He can stick to walls. All of these, thanks to his continued mutation as a clone, were stronger and more powerful than Spider-Man's own abilities though. He was also immune to the worldwide mind purging that erased Spider-Man's identity after it was revealed. He also bears something called the Mark of Cain, a distinctive scarring he burns into people and surfaces after he defeats an enemy. Typically, he would break that enemy's neck and leave his mark on their face. It also lets him melt Spidey's webbing. Plus, if that wasn't bad enough, Kane also takes a page out of Wolverine's book by having a retractable bone spike situated on the undersides of his forearms, that he refers to as the Sting of Kane. Later, Kane would gain more abilities under his Tarantula and Scarlet Spider personas too. Moving on to 6, Spider-Side. Speaking of clones, and at this number we have another clone of Parker's made by Jackal, Spider-Side. Get it? Like genocide, but spider? He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 399 back in 1995, although he wouldn't call himself Spider-Side until a few months later in New Warriors issue 61. Anywho, he firmly believed that he was the real Peter Parker, and became obsessed with convincing Mary Jane that he was such. He was literally created by Jackal to kill Peter, MJ, and another clone, Ben Reilly, and her last number Kane, and was programmed to be extremely violent. He also killed 2,600 innocent people in Springville, Pennsylvania after stealing a deadly virus and making it airborne. He would betray Jackal and later fall to his death off of the Daily Bugle building. Anywho, he's got a few powers that extend beyond the other clones that we've mentioned. He can do all of the stuff that Peter can do, but additionally he has control over his body on a molecular level, meaning he can do things like extend his limbs, shapeshift, change his appearance, control the density of his body tissues in order to make him more resistant to certain attacks, and has transformed his fists into various weapons. He even turned part of himself into liquid in order to simulate Spider-Man's webbing. That's intense. Up next at 5, Venom. Venom is one of Parker's most notorious and famous villains. First appearing as the symbiotic alien costume in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 252 back in 1984, Venom would bond with Peter and try to control his host, only for Peter to eventually get the help of Fantastic Four's Reed Richards to separate him from the symbiote. It would go on to bond with a character who also had a grudge with Peter, Eddie Brock, a journalist who believes Spider-Man had ruined his career. As the story goes, because Venom bonded with Peter, he's able to copy his abilities and can shapeshift, create various weapons out of his body thanks to said shapeshifting, and is undetectable by Parker's spider sense. He's also immune to various other superpowers like Ghost Rider's penance stare. With the current state of the MCU, a character like Venom entering the fray isn't implausible. In fact, he very well could, but that would open up a whole new can of worms, so to speak, and the character, with the state Parker is in currently after the events of Avengers Endgame, would surely overpower him. And at 4, Carnage. Speaking of Venom, Carnage, the symbiote's offspring and antagonist, has been an antagonist of Spider-Man's on occasion. While the Sony Venom Maybe franchise plans on exploring Carnage and Cletus Cassidy in the upcoming Venom sequel, seeing Carnage in the MCU right now may be dabbling a little too deep into some really graphic and violent territory. Aside from his unhinged, unpredictable, and brutal tendencies, Carnage is stronger than Venom for one simple reason. All Clintar offspring, Clintar being the name of the symbiote species, are significantly stronger than the Clintar who birthed them, hence why Venom and Spider-Man have teamed up to fight him in the past. It's Carnage's goal to kill both Spider-Man and Venom so he can be free to cause chaos, murdering whoever he pleases. But rest assured, Carnage can't exist without Venom, that is, if the MCU chose to follow his origins laid out in the comics, meaning until Eddie Brock makes his way into the cinematic universe, Carnage won't be popping up to screw with Spidey anytime soon. And at number 3, Arachne. Arachne is a spider deity, not to be confused with the second iteration of Arachne, aka Spider-Woman Julia Carpenter. This Arachne derives from the ancient Greek mythos of Arachne and the god Athena. She was a woman who claimed to be a better weaver than the god was, so Athena cursed her, turning her into a spider. Except in the comics, she's still partially human with the body and legs of a spider. It's kinda terrifying. Anywho, she fought Spider-Man when she was employed by Hera's Olympus group, which consisted of the Olympian pantheon's gods and deities. While not much is known about her, she is a literal god, so that definitely makes her a contender for a villain that's just too strong for the cinematic universe as we know it. And at number 2, Dr. Octopus. Putting Otto Octavius on our part 2 list is kinda cheating a bit. We featured a later iteration of the character on our past list, when Otto became the superior Spider-Man. While that version of the mad scientist is surely less likely to pop up in the MCU than the OG Doc Ock is, it would be criminal not to include one of Spidey's biggest foes on this list, especially considering that the MCU Peter Parker is definitely not ready to take on the likes of Doc Ock. Considering how much of a challenge the Vulture was, Otto is like a whole other step up from that. To be fair, Parker has grown a lot. He fought alongside the other Avengers against Thanos twice, and bared his own, thanks to some major help with that new and improved Spider-Man suit from Tony Stark that he got in Avengers Infinity War. But having a tricked out suit that helps you significantly on the battlefield can't protect Peter entirely. Otto is a genius, and has outsmarted the web-slinger on several occasions beyond just switching bodies with the hero. His entrance in the MCU is surely going to be a lot for Peter to handle, even if the young hero really does step up in Far From Home. I'm sure we'll see Otto eventually though. And finally, in at number 1, Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn is yet another famous villain of Spidey's who, arguably at this point of time in the MCU, would surely outwit Peter Parker if he were to be introduced into the universe at this very moment. While there is no doubt in our mind that Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, will at some point be integrated into the MCU, there is no way that Peter Parker would be able to handle the criminal mastermind just yet. Sure, we'd bet that Peter could hold his own against the Green Goblin, but Osborn is so much more than that, as we've seen in the comics time and time again. Considering he's Peter's arch nemesis, there's definitely a reason Marvel Studios have been benching him in the Spidey stories to date. When he does arrive, and the Green Goblin begins to terrorize New York City, it'll surely be a conflict of epic proportions. Peter's got some growing to do to get there. But hey, maybe after Far From Home, Peter's growth and newfound responsibilities will place him in a prime position to take on his arch nemesis. And at number 10, the Spider Slayers. The Spider Slayers are robots that were created specifically to hunt down, capture, and kill Spider-Man. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 25 in 1965, there have been various iterations of them over the years, with the first being designed and built by Dr. Spencer Smythe, thanks to funding from J. Jonah Jameson. Smythe would be contaminated by radiation poisoning from creating the robots and tried to take revenge on Jameson and Spider-Man, only to die right before Spider-Man defeated him. Perhaps the more vicious versions of these robots though can be found in the Ultimate Marvel Universe, Earth 1610, where the Spider Slayers were created by the Tinkerer under Nick Fury's command in case Spider-Man ever went rogue. They're 8 feet tall, balance on a large sphere, Spider, have 2 arm cannons and a sphere for their heads. Plus they manage to take down Carnage and kill a disfigured clone of Spider-Man's. Needless to say, they can be lethal. In at number 9, Alistair Smythe. Speaking of the Spider Slayers, our next member is actually a member of said group. Alistair Smythe, the son of Dr. Spencer Smythe, who inherited the legacy from his father, along with a hatred of Spider-Man. Initially he was wheelchair bound until he became the ultimate Spider Slayer and gained the ability to walk. So what's Alistair's deal? Well, he's a scientific genius who knows a thing or two about genetics, cybernetics, and robotics. He built his own version of the Spider Slayers, which were majorly advanced compared to his father's version, being more sophisticated and formidable. He became the ultimate Spider Slayer when he crafted a bioorganic carapace, which is a shell-like protective exoskeleton, like crustacean animals have. This fused with his spine, allowing him to walk, giving him bird-like talons for feet, and 2 curved blade-esque weapons jutting out from his shoulders, along with blades on each of his forearms. In addition to that, he also has a web shooter, and his armor gives him superhuman strength, speed, durability, and agility. That's a tough foe to beat. And at number 8, The Spot. The Spot first appeared in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 97 back in 1984. He's been an antagonist of both Spider-Man's and Daredevil's over the years, and originally worked as a scientist for another mutual threat of theirs, Kingpin. Dr. Jonathan Ahn was assigned by Wilson Fisk to reproduce the radiation levels of Cloak, a hero who can teleport himself over long distances and become intangible. When attempting to recreate his powers though, the Doctor created a circular black portal, which he then stepped into. He passed out and then awoke in a dimension that he believed to be the one that Cloak used as a gateway to teleport through. But when he returned to the real world, he had undergone a massive transformation. Having portals to this other dimension adhered to his skin, giving him the black spots on his body. Now Spot can create portals that lead into an alternate dimension, which he calls Spot World, which allows him to theoretically travel unlimited distances. He can also use spots to avoid taking damage, opening a portal in which attacks pass through. His abilities are something that Spider-Man's spider sense is unable to detect, making Spot fairly deadly. And at 7, the Sinister Six. Okay, let's be real about this supervillain group for a sec. While leaving them out of the future of Spider-Man stories in the MCU might be a big mistake on Marvel Studios' part, there is no way that we'll be seeing the Sinister Six show up on the big screen anytime soon. For starters, not all of its members have been introduced into the MCU yet. Second, there is no way in hell that Peter Parker is ready to take on the combined efforts of foes that deadly. So while we do think that the Sinister Six is inevitable, we definitely think they're a long time coming as far as Spider-Man's films are concerned. And at number 6, Will-O-the-Wisp. Will-O-the-Wisp, aka Jackson Arvad, first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 167, and he's got a handful of abilities up his sleeve that would be hard for any superhero to tackle. He was a physicist who was able to gain control over the electromagnetic attraction between his body's molecules, which led to his powers. Now aside from being a scientific genius, he's capable of density control, similar to Vision, meaning he can make himself intangible if he wanted. He can fly at subsonic speeds, he's capable of hypnosis, and of course he's got superhuman strength, durability, and speed. He's come into contact with Spider-Man on multiple occasions, and once Civil War rolled around and Peter Parker's identity was revealed, he worked with Chameleon on a scheme in order to get revenge on the web-slinging hero. In at number 5, Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is a character we'll likely never see in the MCU. Or rather, an iteration of the character who hasn't even come into the MCU yet. And we're talking Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus. Now during the Dying Wish storyline back in 2012, Otto was terminally ill from his years of fighting crime, and set in motion a plan to continue his legacy. Now this plan involved swapping his consciousness with Peter Parker, planting Parker into his dying body and Otto into Peter's healthy web-slinging one. The plan was successful, Parker died, and Otto became Spider-Man, calling himself the Superior Spider-Man. As you can imagine, fans weren't really into that, and Parker eventually returned, but Otto to this day continues to fight on as the Superior Spider-Man in the second volume of his solo series. So what makes him superior, and a villain that is too strong for the MCU, aside for reasons that we've already mentioned? Well, for starters, he had taken over Peter's body. He had access to Peter's memories. He improved upon Spider-Man's costume, upgrading it a whole lot, and still has the genius level intellect and scientific mind of Otto. So yeah, overall, not a villain Peter Parker of the MCU would be overly eager to see come alive off the panels, I'm sure. In at 4, Red Goblin. While the Green Goblin, aka Norman Osborn, is Spider-Man's arch nemesis, and surely will enter the MCU one day, this version of Osborn combines the Green Goblin along with the enemy of another Parker rival. Red Goblin is the result of Norman Osborn bonding with the Carnage symbiote. The symbiote Venom birthed, who has an adoration of all things blood and violence, hence the name. Anywho, Carnage got mixed in with the Goblin formula, which made both of them stronger and purged them of their weaknesses. Eventually Osborn's youngest son, Normie, ended up getting infected too and becomes the Goblin Child. And at number 3, Jackal. For this number, we're specifically specifically looking at Miles Warren as Jackal, because there's been multiple Jackals. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 31 back in 1965, Warren wouldn't become the Jackal until almost 100 issues later. Miles had a grudge against Spider-Man, believing that he was responsible for Gwen Stacy's death. He was obsessed with Gwen Stacy despite their large age difference. Now, after a failed stint as the High Evolutionary's assistant and a dead family because of one of his creations, and also a dead assistant of his that himself suffocated, Warren ends up successfully cloning humans. And begins to clone Peter Parker, of course. This carried into the highly controversial clone saga, with Jackal eventually managing to create clones of himself too. Now, aside from his scientific genius, he ends up splicing his genes with the genes of a Jackal, which grants him superhuman strength, agility, and speed. All in all, a fellow who can stir up that much trouble is not someone to be taken lightly. From a master of clones to a master manipulator, in at number 2 we have Mephisto. Mephisto is a character who many deem as too powerful overall for the MCU, regardless of what heroes he takes on. And fun fact, he's actually quite present throughout the Infinity Gauntlet comic, but his lines from that comic were given to Ebony Maw in the Infinity War film. Anywho, Mephisto, who first appeared in 1968 in the Silver Surfer issue 3, has been a foe of many heroes in the Marvel Universe. He is a demonic immortal entity based off of the Mephisto of Faust's legend, who uses a variety of magic the likes of altering time, projecting illusions, shape and size shifting, regeneration, manipulating memories, and much more. He is known for acquiring souls but cannot subjugate the will of another being, hence why he's always making deals and pacts with superheroes that he wants, you know, to put in their place and to get things from. Blah. Peter Parker got tangled up with Mephisto in the One More Day story event, in which the demon offers to save the life of Aunt May if Spider-Man gives up his marriage to Mary Jane Parker. Mary Jane Watson, I guess, technically. But she's a Parker. They got married. Is a thing. He does. And Mephisto not only erases their marriage, but erases the little girl who would be their future daughter, after also appearing as that little girl. The storyline was highly criticized. Needless to say, Mephisto is incredibly powerful, incredibly manipulative, and a villain that would be difficult to place in the MCU in its current state. Speaking of difficult villains though, in at number 1, Null. If you thought an immortal demon entity was a lot, how about a symbiote god? Null is technically more of a Venom villain, but this nefarious being also fought against Spider-Man. Null is a malevolent deity whose existence predates the universe, having prior just drifted through the endless abyss that existed before it. The Celestials created the universe, and that didn't bode well with Null, who decapitated one of them in retaliation. He essentially is the creator of the Clintar, the symbiotes, having manifested a symbiotic suit of armor from the eldritch darkness he commanded, setting out on a mission to commit celestial genocide. Big goals. He's got a ridiculous amount of power, he's got divine physiology, he has the ability to create, control, and manipulate eldritch darkness, which is a manifestation of the primordial void that existed before the universe. He can create symbiotes and dominate them via hive mind. He's also existed for over 12.7 billion years, so he's pretty old. He is self-sustaining, and he has a regenerative healing factor, so like death is not a thing for this fellow. His one weakness though? The light, a metaphysical force that came into being with the Big Bang that spread throughout the abyss. Needless to say, don't know if Peter Parker could take him right now. Might be a little tough for him. Sorry, Tom Holland. I say that with love.
Number 10. Frank. Yep, Frank. Okay, fine. You may know him better as Frankenstein's monster. You know the beginning of Frank's story, created by Victor Frankenstein, or Frankenstein if you prefer. The monster eventually found himself frozen in ice, being thawed a century later. After falling in with some rough crowds, he would eventually go on to join various monster hunting teams, including the Fearsome Four and later the all-new Howling Commandos, after being recruited by Agent Coulson. Since he's kind of already dead, he can't really die, and since his cells aren't alive, he's even immune to disease. And I mean, considering he's the star of one of the greatest horror franchises in the world, I'd say he's pretty scary. Number 9. Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler definitely isn't what most people think of when they think scary superhero, but he was on my mind since I just did an alternate versions list for him, a link down below maybe. That said, he's definitely one of the freakiest looking heroes out there, largely because of his demonic heritage. Now look, I'm no bigot, but the dude definitely looks like a demon, which is fine in comic books, but if I ran into him in a dark alley, I would not be pleased, especially if he suddenly teleported behind me. He also ticks the Immortal box since he already died and had to sacrifice his soul to come back to life, which sounds kinda selfish, but it was actually for the greater good. Long story. Number 8. Deadman. Boston Brand was a circus acrobat, but after being murdered, he made a deal with Ramakrishna, a Hindu goddess, to give him powers to find his murderer. But he's a decent guy, so if he sees someone being bad while he's finding the murderer, he stops them by possessing people. This led to him working with various super teams, including Justice Society International. And I gotta say, this was a pretty easy choice, since Deadman is a spooky, spooky ghost, which instantly gives him both immortality cred and scary cred. Making my job easy. Another nice thing is that he looks a lot more villainous than most heroes, which also means he looks pretty darn scary. Sometimes. Other times he's a bit goofy, but we won't talk about those times. He's scary, he's immortal, he's on the list. Next, number 7, the Immortal Hulk. Yeah, Hulk in general is pretty scary and pretty immortal, but Immortal Hulk is even scarier and even immortal. Not only does he have a healing factor keeping him young and strapping, but the whole point of the character is that this Hulk keeps bringing Banner back to life whenever he dies. So yeah, that's pretty darn immortal. Immortal Hulk, unlike other modern versions, only comes out in the evening if Bruce Banner is injured or dead, and apparently Immortal Hulk is the most powerful one yet. So not only does he look terrifying, but he's also even stronger than previous incarnations. Plus, as I said, he only comes out at night, and we all know nighttime is super spooky. Number 6, Ghost Rider. I think we all knew Ghost Rider would be on here. I doubt I need to really explain why he's scary, but in case you're totally lost, he's a biker with a flaming skull and demon chains who can consume souls and cause you to feel every bit of pain you've ever inflicted on someone. So yeah, probably not great to run into in a dark alley, especially if you're a jerk. In terms of immortality, it's stated in Ghost Rider's Heavens on Fire number 6 that only God can destroy a Ghost Rider, since he created them. True, the concept of God in the Marvel Universe is a bit shaky, so this might not be meant to be taken literally, but I think it's fairly safe to call them immortal. Number 5, Venom. When it comes to scary comic book characters, Venom is definitely one of the first a lot of people think of. I know he gave me nightmares as a kid, although I also had a talking toy of him, which was my favorite. Represent. Venom is freaky not only for his terrifying appearance, but also because the idea of having an alien symbiote latch onto me and control me sounds awful. However, the most terrifying thing about Venom is talking about him/it/them. Am I talking about the symbiote? The combination of them? Which version of the combination? Who's with the symbiote? Which of the dozen retcons are we referring to? And how many people will yell at me in the comments if I get it wrong? Seriously? It's a nightmare. In terms of immortality, we haven't really seen a symbiote latch onto a host for long enough to know if they're immortal that way, but the symbiotes themselves are believed to be, so I think that counts. See? Confusing. Number 4, Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is definitely among the lesser-known superheroes on this list. Some people may not even be aware that he's a good guy, since characters based on horror tropes tend to be pretty evil. But hey, as we learned with Frank, you mustn't judge a book by its cover, even if it is a pretty scary cover. Swamp Thing came into being when scientist Alec Holland had an incident with his biorestorative formula, causing his consciousness to enter a nearby swamp. This consciousness was then able to enter any plant life and use it as a body of sorts. Despite its horrid appearance, Swamp Thing would go on to find love and fight to protect humanity and nature. And yes, the Swamp Thing is immortal. As long as there is plant life somewhere in the universe, there's somewhere for Swamp Thing's consciousness to live. It's like he has 8 gazillion Horcruxes, except he doesn't have to split his soul. Not too shabby. Number 3, Lobo. Lobo is a big, strong, loud, arrogant, violent blowhard from the planet Zarnia. He's also, full disclosure, one of my favorite characters, so I'm a wee bit biased here. That said, he definitely fits the criteria. Immortal? Check. He's such a wacko that he was straight up banished from the afterlife. Scary? Check. Freaky looks aside, his name translates to "He who devours your entrails and thoroughly enjoys it." And the main man lives up to that name, having exterminated almost everyone on his home planet, including children, with flying scorpions. Yeah, Lobo was created as a parody of all the 90s comic books that were hell-bent on being super gritty and dark and intense, and he is definitely all of those things, with a tongue planted firmly in one's cheek. Number 2, Spawn. The thing with this list is that most superheroes look, well, heroic, which generally means they don't look very scary. Not so with Spawn. Al Simmons was a cop who was murdered and sent to hell, only to make a deal with Malebolgia to become a Hellspawn, in exchange for seeing his wife one last time. And he's pretty darn cool. Sure, the 97 version looked a bit more like a WWE character than Demon Spawn, but if you want any proof that he's a scary dude, check out the trailer for the 2020 reboot, because my goodness, he terrifying. In terms of immortality, Spawn won't die of old age, and generally won't die of anything unless beheaded by a weapon of heaven. Or if you manage to kill him in the Dead Zone, an alley on Earth that counts as heaven's domain. So you should probably avoid that alley, or he'll get murdered by homeless men again. True story. Number 1, Deadpool. That's right, nerds. I don't care that I've talked about him a million times on this channel. If you give me an opportunity to slap Deadpool onto a list, I'm slapping him onto the list. For the 3 people who somehow don't know by now, Wade Wilson is a wisecracking mercenary who, through an experimental treatment, gained absurd regenerative abilities, to the point where he basically can't die. And why is he scary? Well, because his skin looks like this. Yeah, those are tumors. You're welcome. Plus, he isn't exactly the most stable person, so you kinda gotta watch your back even if he is your friend. As you may have guessed, he's my favorite hero of all time, and I am absurdly excited for him to join the MCU. Just please, for the love of God, bring back Hugh Jackman for one more movie! It needs to happen. Please.
And at 10, Painkiller Jane. First appearing in 22 Brides number 1, Painkiller Jane is an event comics character created for a 5-issue miniseries, but then went on to crossover with characters like the Punisher and Hellboy. Jane Vasco started out as an undercover cop trying to infiltrate the mob. After gaining the trust of the mob boss, she is sent to meet a rival gang member to pass on a message, but unbeknownst to her, they planted a bomb on her, blowing it up as soon as she meets the member. He somehow survives and is able to revive her, while also giving her the superhuman ability to regenerate in the process. She then decides to leave her life as a cop behind, becoming the vigilante Painkiller Jane. While this may be the origin listed on most websites, a different origin was presented in the first Painkiller Jane miniseries, and the Dynamite Comics miniseries contains references to both versions. Her powers make her indestructible, being able to heal wounds in less than a minute. She has recovered from gunshots, explosions, chemical weapons, axes to the spine, and even a shotgun to the face, and if that's not the description of immortality, I don't know what is. And at 9, Batman. Batman isn't really immortal. He's a regular guy who has insane martial arts skills, and he's the world's greatest detective. But he's been around since 1939, that's 80 years. And while it may be a long time for the Bat, he's still looking good for his age, even though he should be looking like Bruce Wayne from the CW Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover. First appearing in Detective Comics number 27, Batman may not be your typical version of Immortal, but it's 100% sure that under no circumstance will Batman ever be killed off. Permanently, I should say. Unless it's an alternate version of him and not the main one that is bringing in the major bucks. The only way they would kill off Batman is if they needed the publicity or if everyone stopped reading, but nobody's gonna stop reading Batman. He's immortal because he brings in a huge amount of money. He's got like that protagonist armor, like the solid armor at that. And it ain't Deadpool. Deadpool is one hell of a disease, and I mean that as in you'll never truly be rid of him. He's like an STI. Sure, your symptoms may go down and you won't be able to spread it, but it will flare up again every once in a while. First appearing in the New Mutants number 98, Wade Winston Wilson is meant to be a parody of Slade Wilson, and they do this in the best way. The wisecracking, death-loving merc with a mouth is able to, like Painkiller Jane, restore any wound within a matter of seconds, or longer if it's a whole appendage, like a hand. This ability also depends on his mental state. If he's happy, awake, and alert, it works at its best. His healing factor is strong enough that he has survived complete incineration and decapitation, and even his head was able to be its own person as Headpool. He was able to regrow his head as well after it was pulverized by the Hulk in Deadpool Kills the Universe, a graphic novel. If you can do that, where can I sign up? I can look like an avocado had sex with an older, more disgusting avocado on a topographical map of Utah, and it's 7 Groot. I am Groot. I am Groot. I am Groot. Okay, I'm not actually gonna do that the whole time. And now I've also realized that the editor can put whatever they want over me saying that. Oh no. First appearing in Tales to Astonish number 13 in 1960, Groot is essentially a tree. He is a flora colossus from planet X. These beings are tree-like humanoids whose language can only be understood by listening to the stiffness of their larynx and the breaths in between each sentence, which is one of the most creative things that we've seen done with a language. Sure, you can't speak it like Dothraki, but it's still pretty cool. Groot originally came to Earth to capture and study humans, but was destroyed by termites used by Leslie Evans. Zemnu made a duplicate of Groot by combining a human and a tree so it could fight Hulk, but that was destroyed as well. In the MCU, Groot sacrificed himself in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, saying "We are Groot" rather than "I am Groot," but then was brought back using a leftover twig, which sprouted into Baby Groot and more recently Teen Groot. This guy has died and come back more times than me, so I'd say that's pretty damn impressive. I've come back a total of 0 times. I think. I might have died once. I don't know. And at 6, Ghost Rider. First appearing in Marvel Spotlight number 5, Johnny Blaze agrees to give his soul to the devil in order to save his father's life. The result of this is, at night, when he is around evil, his flesh becomes surrounded in hellfire and his head becomes a fiery skull. He rides a fiery motorcycle as well and can launch blasts of hellfire from his typically skeletal hands. There have been many incarnations of the Ghost Rider over the years: Johnny Blaze, Noble Kale, Denny Ketch, Alejandro Jones, and Robbie Reyes, to name a few. And while being able to get shot, stabbed, or whacked and not feel anything can contribute to immortality, the fact that there will never not be a Ghost Rider serves as more of a way to secure immortality. I almost included Oliver Queen on the list because of what happened during the CW Crisis crossover, but I figured I'd not include characters based on what happened on TV. I'd just do comics. And at 5, Dr. Fate. First appearing in More Fun Comics number 55, his origins and alter ego were not shown until More Fun Comics number 67, where it was revealed that Kent Nelson and his father went on an expedition to the Valley of Ur. While exploring, Kent's father finds a temple. They explore it further and Kent opens the tomb of Nabu the Wise, reviving him from suspended animation and releasing a poisonous gas that kills his father. Taking pity on Kent, Nabu spends the next 20 years teaching him the ways of the sorcerer, giving him a mystical helmet, amulet, and cloak when he completes his training. Just like Ghost Rider, there have been many different people taking on the Dr. Fate title: Kent Nelson, Jared Stevens, Hector Hall, and Khaled Nassour, just to name a few. And gaining the powers of a freaking sorcerer is literally one of the coolest things that can ever happen. But the persona of Dr. Fate will always live on, always finding someone new to wear the helmet and use the title. So while the characters that wear the helmet may pass and change, the mantle of Dr. Fate will always have a home, which is really pure immortality. Wow, words. And at 4, Superman. First seen in Action Comics number 1, Superman has technically died before, but in the universe of comics, death is never really a true threat. The Death of Superman storyline began in 1992 and lasted until late 1993, where it shocked fans to think that Superman was truly dead and that there was no returning. However, this is often cited as the event that sparked the whole nobody ever really dies in comic books theme, where no matter who dies, they will bring him back within the next few issues. While also being bulletproof and super strong, he can fly, has heat vision and frost breath, and can basically do whatever he wants with no consequences. Yes, while it may be possible to kill him like they have in the past, Superman is considered the poster boy of comic books and referred to as the first superhero by many. This is technically untrue because others like Zorro predate him and fit the same bill as Superman, but whatever. You can't kill the literal face of comics, especially when we have events like Blackest Night which bring back characters who even their creators forgot about. And at 3, Green Lantern. Whenever a Green Lantern dies, another creature worthy of a ring gets chosen. There is no way to ever really eradicate any Lantern Corps from existence, since the rings will just, straight up go find a new host. There have also been plenty of Green Lanterns explored in the comics: Alan Scott, Hal Jordan, John Stewart, Jessica Cruz, John Diggle. Plenty of men and women and aliens have gotten their hands on a green ring of power. But what if we were to wipe out every single Lantern at once? Like a bomb that is able to get them all since they were like at a con or something. Well, if one ring managed to survive, it would still find another host. So you'd have to destroy the rings as well. But unless you can literally do all of this at once, you'd be screwed. Because then they come for you because you just literally killed everyone. And at 2, Wolverine. This wannabe honey badger has slowly had his healing factor amped up over time. He used to take days to recover from a severe beating, as seen in the classic X-Men in Australia storyline in the 90s. But now you can drop an atom bomb on him and he can just get right back up. In fact, it was revealed that every time Wolverine dies, he goes to like this hellish world, where he has to fight a demon samurai for the right to return to life. Yeah, I don't get it either. Wolverine has also managed to regenerate his entire body from a single drop of blood after it landed on the Crystal of Ultimate Vision in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, Annual number 11 in 1987. This also gave him incredible cosmic powers, which he abandoned and instead destroyed the crystal, killing Horde, who was trying to take it for himself. Why would you do that? Which is pretty cool and one of the dopest things I've seen come from comics, but again, why would you do that? Just tear him apart. God. Finally, in at number 1, Mr. Immortal. How can I not finish this list off with the guy whose name is literally immortal? First appearing in West Coast Avengers Volume 2, number 46 in 1989, Craig Hollis was visited by the entity known as Death Urge, shortly after his birth and the death of his mother. This entity started urging Craig to do dangerous things, while his father thinks it's just an imaginary friend. Eventually, as Craig calls him Dirge, convinces Craig to set his house on fire and hide beneath it. This event kills his father and Dirge leaves. He gets put in foster care with an abusive father, but grows close to his foster sister. They fall in love, but is torn away when she offs herself. This causes Dirge to come back, and Craig asks him to kill him as well so that he can be with her. Dirge refuses because he's just a dick, But this doesn't stop Craig, who tried to fulfill his wish by jumping off a building, only to realize he can't die. He uses this ability to become a superhero, and as his first outing as Mr. Immortal, he's shot and left for dead. He decided he needed a team to make better use of his abilities, so after putting an ad out on Craigslist, he founds the Great Lake Avengers. A superhero who can't die but wants to? That sounds pretty interesting to me.
In at number 10, M. Monet St. Croix was born in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and was the second daughter of a very wealthy French aristocrat. She grew up as a typical spoiled rich girl until a series of extremely unfortunate events took hold of her. First, her mother died mysteriously, just out of the blue. Then, her brother Marius turned out to be a mutant who practiced black magic and transformed her into a mute red-skinned creature called Penance. And then, she was banished to another dimension with no real way home. Oh yeah, this also happened over the course of a few days. So fast forward a little bit through crazy 90s X-Men storytelling, and Monet is back on Earth, no longer a red-skinned creature, and her mutant powers have fully manifested. What are these powers, you may ask? Well, superhuman strength, speed, agility, dexterity, reflexes, coordination, balance, vision, hearing, endurance, a genius level intellect, accelerated healing factor, supersonic flight, telekinesis, telepathy, and the ability to see mutant auras. This whole thing just kind of feels like the writers couldn't agree on one specific power, so instead of just picking one, they just threw them all on the desk and picked all of them. She was a member of Magneto's Uncanny X-Men from 2016 to 2017, which was essentially a mutant Black Ops hit squad. A perfect place for this jack of all trades. And at number 9, Age of Apocalypse Magneto. Let's get this out of the way immediately. Age of Apocalypse is weird, really weird. For some reason, it's regarded as one of the best alternate timeline stories ever, but have you ever actually read the entire run? Because I did, and it's 90s as and that's not a good thing. But one of the best things to come out of this alternate timeline story is Eric Lehnsherr, aka Magneto, aka founder and leader of the X-Men. Yeah, that's right. Let me explain how we got here. So do you remember Legion from part 1 of this list? Well, one time, he decided it would be a great idea to go back in time and murder Magneto in order to get rid of the X-Men's greatest foe before he even became a threat. Things didn't really go to plan because Legion ended up killing his dad, Xavier, and erased himself along with his entire timeline from history. See? 90s is In a world without Professor X, Apocalypse rose to power, and Magneto had to create his own X-Men to oppose him. Years of living as a rebel and constantly on the run from Apocalypse's armies molded this Magneto into one of the biggest badasses Marvel has ever seen. He eventually takes on Apocalypse in a one-on-one duel to the death, and rips Apocalypse in half using the iron in Apocalypse's blood. 90s is And at number 8, Polaris. Lorna Dane is the daughter of Magneto, and with great power comes great magnetism. Much like her father, Polaris has the power of electromagnetic manipulation, and is just as powerful as her dad in many regards, but one moment in particular made her one of the most OP mutants of all time. During the Last Days part of the 2015 Secret Wars storyline, the Ultimate Universe's Earth was on a collision course with the 616 Universe's Earth. If they collided, both would be destroyed, killing all life on both universes. So it was up to Polaris and Magneto to team up and use their powers to hold both Earths apart from one another while fighting Sentinels. If this version of Polaris shows up in the MCU, like, who can stop her? And at number 7, Namor. The King of Atlantis is in fact not just a merman, but he's also a mutant. The first mutant in fact, if you want to believe the title of his 2010 solo run. Namor, the Submariner, is an Atlantean human mutant hybrid, and has all the powers of an Atlantean. Aquatic adaptation, hydrokinesis, telepathic control over marine life, but he also has his mutant abilities of super speed, strength, flight, agility, and mild invulnerability. And the cherry on top, his lifespan is far longer than that of regular humans, and has been in the prime of his life for like the last 100 years or so. With all these things combined, Namor has been a force to be reckoned with in Marvel Comics since his inception, and has gone toe to toe with some of Marvel's biggest villains, and lived to tell the tale. There was also that one time where he joined Thanos' cabal, murdered countless heroes from alternate Earths with his bare hands, but he doesn't really like to talk about that. And at 6, Ava Bell. Ava Bell, aka Tempest, was one of Cyclops' X-Men revolutionaries during a time in comics where nobody really knew what they wanted to do with the X-Men. Was Cyclops a good guy? Was he the new Magneto? Nobody knew. It was weird, but what wasn't weird was how awesome Tempest was. Tempest is able to manipulate time within bubbles. She could just make them out of thin air. In short, she can create a time bubble, and then time within said bubble can be manipulated at her command. Everything outside the bubble moves normally, while everything inside the bubble can be slowed down to a standstill for exactly 60 seconds. Once, under extreme stress, she time traveled to the year 2099, trained with the Sorcerer Supreme, and then came back to the current timeline with a far greater understanding of her powers. Her powers are pretty ridiculous if you ask me. And at number 5, Cable. Many of you pointed out that the last list was essentially a Summers family reunion, which you weren't wrong, but there was one really important Summers boy missing, and that was Cable. Nathan Summers is one of the most powerful mutants in existence when left unchecked. He's the biological son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, a clone of Jean Grey. If you've seen Deadpool 2, then you've only gotten a small glimpse of what Cable is actually capable of. Cable's powers are telepathy and telekinesis, but they're severely handicapped by his techno-organic virus in his body. He has to use the majority of his awesome power just to keep it contained to one side of his body. If he didn't do this, he'd die. However, there was one time in particular where Cable was able to cut loose and use all his power. In the series Cable and Deadpool, Cable once held an entire island in the air with one hand, fought the X-Men and the Silver Surfer with his other hand. I'd like to see Josh Brolin pull that one off in Deadpool 3. And at number 4, Triage. Christopher Muse is another of Cyclops' aforementioned X-Men revolutionaries, and his powers are pretty ridiculous. In short, he can heal people just by touching them. Well, seems simple enough, right? Well, it gets a little more complicated the more you look into what he's doing over time. Initially, Triage is only able to heal things like broken bones, cuts, bruises. However, later on in the comics, he becomes so powerful that he can actually bring the recently deceased back to life. He even managed to bring himself back to life after being stabbed in the neck by Wolverine and Mystique's alternate universe son. Yeah, that was a thing that happened. And at number 3, Matthew Malloy. This guy had a very brief appearance in the comics, but oh, what an appearance. Matthew Malloy witnessed the death of his wife during the Skrull invasion of Earth, and was left horribly traumatized by the event, as anyone would. Years later, he met up with his former sister-in-law, and this reminder of his former life was the breaking point for his psyche. His mutant powers emerged and vaporized everything around him, including said former sister-in-law. S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up to detain him, he blows up S.H.I.E.L.D. X-Men shows up to talk him down, they get blown up, and Matthew rewrites the laws of physics and reassembles himself. When he goes to the X-Mansion to ask for help, he accidentally kills more X-Men. The only way they were able to stop this guy was by going back in time and preventing his parents from ever meeting. If that's not powerful, I don't know what is. And at number 2, Colossus Juggernaut. Okay, I know what you're thinking. How can Colossus Juggernaut be higher on this list than Matthew Malloy, a man who can literally bend space and time to his will? Well, in short, it's my list, and I want to talk about Colossus Juggernaut at number 2. Let me know down in the comments if you've ever used your own great power to manipulate things to your own benefit. Anyways, Peter Rasputin is a giant, metal Russian man who punches things until they stop moving. The Juggernaut is an unstoppable avatar of the interdimensional demon Sidorak, a giant mammoth of a man who cannot be stopped once he starts building momentum. What happens when you combine these two things together? You get Colossus Juggernaut, one of the coolest amalgams ever created by Marvel. Oh yeah, and he's canon. Suck it, Iron Hammer. Anyways, this guy's power level far exceeds that of 9,000, and he once fought against the previous Juggernaut, Cain Marko, after having his skull split in half. Metal. And in at number 1, Old Man Phoenix. Jason Aaron's run on Thor might be the greatest Thor story ever told. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you get to it ASAP. It's amazing. He covers pre-worthy Thor from mythology, lovable current-day Thor, God of Thunder, and a future version of Thor where he's become the Allfather and basically Odin with a hammer. In the old Thor universe, we follow Thor as he flies through a dying universe trying to find a way to save it. Who does he run into? Well, Wolverine, the last mutant in existence, and he's possessed by the Phoenix Force. Think about it. Logan's healing factor, upgraded by all the power of the entire Phoenix Force. He is so powerful, he was burnt into a skeleton and still kept fighting. The only reason he died was because he fused himself into Mjolnir to give his powers to Thor. Absolute unit.
And at number 10, Elixir. Elixir, aka Josh Foley, first appeared in 2003 in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 5. Funny enough, he was initially a member of an anti-mutant group called the Reavers, until his powers manifested and he's kicked out of the group, causing him to reluctantly join the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning after his parents also kick him out of his home. Speaking of his powers, Elixir is able to control the biological structure of any organic matter, which also includes his own body, as long as he is in proximity of his target. This means he can do things like heal others, restore and boost mutant powers, create painful and life-threatening ailments, like boils, welts, and even fatal tumors, cure the legacy virus, and even cause death. He can sense when people are sick or if there are any abnormalities in their body. He can also regenerate on a cellular level, and resurrect himself, meaning he he is pretty much immortal. And at number 9, Vulcan. Initially introduced in 2006 in X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 1, Vulcan, aka Gabriel Summers, is the younger brother of Cyclops and Havoc. While he's known more so for being a supervillain, the character once upon a time was part of the X-Men team. Energy is Vulcan's jam. He can psionically manipulate, transform, control, and absorb vast amounts of energy, including energy on the electromagnetic spectrum and from exotic sources, such as Cyclops' optic blasts, or even magically created energy. He can even tap into and suppress mutant energies if he'd like, and can produce light, heat, force, you name it. This also allows him to fly and survive in space. And at number 8, Kid Omega, aka Quentin Quire. Quentin Quire first appeared in New X-Men issue 134 back in 2003, joining the Xavier Institute. He quickly became one of Xavier's most favored students, with the professor attempting to help him control his powers. But Quentin takes a bit of a turn for the worse when he decides to start up the Omega Gang, a group of teenage mutants whose goal it was to exact revenge for the death of a famous mutant fashion designer. That, and he is super depressed about a girl not liking him back and the fact that he was adopted. Dude has fragile self-esteem. Anywho, what can he do? Well, he has advanced precognitive and telepathic abilities that not only allow him to think at immense speeds, but to manipulate the minds of others, resist mind probes, and he can psychically influence a large group of people at one time. He's even created an entire universe in his mind that he calls the Construct that he can imprison people within. Minus his previous gang shenanigans, Quentin generally acts in the interest of good, having recently been featured a member of the Fresh Start iteration of the West Coast Avengers. And at 7, Magik, aka Ilyana Rasputina. Magik is the younger sister of Colossus, and first debuted in Giant Size X-Men issue 1 back in 1975. Now despite that, her character was merely a background character for the most part, and it wasn't until 8 years later that she was given a proper name in the Uncanny X-Men issue 160 in 1982, after aging 7 years in the paranormal dimension of Limbo, where she gained her mutant abilities. This includes interdimensional teleportation, magic manipulation, and the use of something called Soul Sword, which is something created by her own life force energy, a physical sword that with each use becomes more powerful. She can also manifest eldritch armor. During her time in Limbo, Magik became the sorceress supreme of that dimension, able to cast a plethora of spells using a mix of black magic and white magic, being taught the latter by an alternate universe version of Storm. She's also capable of creating powerful mind-blocking shields, keeping the likes of some of the strongest telepathic mutants out of her head, including Professor X. And at number 6, X-Man Nate Grey. Scott Summers and Jean Grey are responsible for some of the most powerful offspring in the mutant community, regardless of whether or not they actually intended to parent them. It's worth noting that Nate Grey is not Cable. Both characters are descendants of genetic material from Scott Summers and Jean Grey, but came to be in different manners, with Nate being grown in a laboratory in an alternate dimension thanks to Mr. Sinister, who used Scott and Jean's DNA to do so. Cable, on the other hand, is the son of Scott and Madeline Pryor, who is the clone of Jean Grey. Anywho, with that out of the way, let's talk about Nate. He has the ability to tap into the enormous psychic resources found in the astral plane, which allows him to manipulate matter and energy. His powers were diminished though by the Omega Machine. He's a character whose powers sometimes inflate and sometimes are taken away in the comics. He can also exist as living psychic energy, existing outside of his corporeal form. He was given his own solo series during Age of Apocalypse that briefly replaced Cable's series, and his series ended up running until 2001 as he was brought into the Earth 616 continuity, with it ending with his seemingly sacrificial death after struggling for years with being the most powerful person in a reality in which he did not belong. How tragic. Speaking of Scott and Jean's offspring, and at number 5, Rachel Summers. Rachel Summers was created by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, first appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 141 back in 1981. But she didn't become Rachel Summers until after her debut, thanks to retcons. Gotta love a retcon. From an alternate future, she's the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey, the sister of Nate Grey, and a half-sister of Cable's. And she's hella strong. Not only has she had the Phoenix Force's abilities, she's also an empath, telepathic, telekinetic, and can astral project. She has limited time manipulation abilities too, and her telekinesis abilities can remotely manipulate matter, including on a subatomic level. And at number 4, Legion, aka David Haller. Legion, also known as David Charles Haller, is the son of Professor Charles Xavier. He traveled 20 years into the past in order to kill Magneto before his father's nemesis had the chance to amass power. But before he could, he ended up killing his father instead, which caused the Age of Apocalypse timeline to occur. Legion is often depicted as an anti-hero, and is known for his severe dissociative identity disorder, which formed after his mutant powers manifested during a terrorist attack in which he ended up absorbing the mind of the terrorist leader into his own. Because of his trauma, parts of David's personality splinter, each controlling a different aspect of his powers. Speaking of powers, why is he so strong aside from his parentage? Well, he can reality warp, he can shapeshift, he can manipulate matter, and is capable of transmutation. He can manipulate energy, he's telepathic, telekinetic, he can teleport, and of course, he can time travel. But because of his severe dissociative identity disorder in later story arcs, he's often sedated or hospitalized. Reed Richards, Madison Jonathan Jeffries and Dr. Nemesis would later create something called a neutral switchboard wristband that would help him control his multiple personalities and better manage his powers. And in X-Men Legacy, he ended up erasing himself from existence altogether, but even that didn't fully work out for him. Poor Legion. And at number 3, Hope Summers. Hope Summers first appeared in X-Men issue 205 in 2007 as part of the X-Men Messiah Complex storyline. After Decimation, a story event in which Scarlet Witch used her powers to turn all of the mutants into regular depowered humans, Hope was the first mutant to be born, which starts a hunt for the character. She's saved by Cable, who names her after her adopted mother who looked after the child with him, and Summers technically being Cable's last name. Hope is a vessel of the Phoenix Force and has unspecified limits when it comes to physically manipulating and mimicking the powers of other mutants. So yeah, in the scope of things that could be super deadly later on down the line when mutant characters have been established in the MCU. Hope's mimicry abilities allow her to use those mutant powers at their utmost capacity, but because of this she is potentially incredibly dangerous to people and the environment around her due to the massive amounts of power levels that she generates. Talk about a walking bomb. And at number 2, Jean Grey. Let's be honest here, Jean Grey is 100% going to be added to the MCU. It's almost inevitable, but the chances that we'll be seeing the Phoenix Force flexing its OP-ness on the big screen are pretty slim, at least for now. If anything, since the Phoenix Force is a major part of the X-Men stories, we think that if Jean does become the Phoenix, it'll be an event that's built up over time in the MCU, similar to what was done with the Infinity Gauntlet story arc. So really, Jean's Phoenix is just too strong for the MCU right now, but who knows what the future will hold. Regardless, she is OP as hell. And finally, at number 1, Franklin Richards. Franklin Richards is the son of Mr. Fantastic Reed Richards and Invisible Woman Sue Storm. And he's one incredibly powerful kid, that's for damn sure. First introduced in 1968 in Fantastic Four Annual Issue 6, Franklin is way beyond an Omega level mutant, having vast reality manipulating powers along with psionic powers. This means he can manipulate matter and energy on a cosmic scale, project energy, is capable of telekinesis, telepathy, astral projection, and precognition. He can teleport, and these two things are great. He's immortal and can create pocket universes. The kid can create his own damn universes. Celestials consider him to be on par with them, and his powers only increase the older he gets. So yeah, I'm sure we'd all love to see what Marvel Studios would do with a character like that. And to be fair, we're sure Franklin Richards is far from being up on the silver screen. The MCU still needs to establish his parents first. And some people have theorized that that won't happen until after Phase 5, so long way to go, friends. Long way to go.